PGP started out as a human rights project. Back in the 1980s, I was an activist for the nuclear weapons freeze campaign. Grassroots activists needed protection from their own governments, not just in the US, but also in many other countries that have autocratic governments. Governments live in a golden age of surveillance. Everything that we do is surveilled. And so by encrypting our email, text messaging, our phone calls, we're trying to hang on for dear life to a little bit of privacy that we have left. Governments around the world have this panorama of visibility of observing us, and there's a few dark pixels left that are not illuminated, and they're complaining about those dark pixels. It's not clear that democracy can survive governments having omniscience. We're getting the boiled frog treatment. It's hard to get people active against the erosion of privacy because, well, it has gradually eroded over the years, and now people think it's normal.
In the early 90s, Phil Zimmerman released a groundbreaking encryption program called PGP. Who has heard of PGP? We have the person who created it right here. Give him a round of applause. Now, this software allowed people to protect their email communications with robust encryption. However, at the time, encryption was classed as munitions, and the federal government accused Phil of violating the Arms Export Control Act. They investigated Phil for 3 years, claiming that spreading PGP around the world as free encryption software, he was engaging in munitions trafficking and jeopardizing US national security. So that battle went on for 3 years. And it goes down in history as the first crypto wars, not against cryptocurrency, but against encryption, waged by cypherpunks all over the world and those who identified simply as people who believed that privacy was a fundamental right. Phil published source code in books with MIT. He fought for code to be recognized as freedom of speech. Eventually, the federal government dropped their case. PGP became the most widely used email encryption software in the world, and thanks to his efforts to make sure that encryption tools remain available to the public, we now have the ability to protect our privacy. But once again, we find ourselves in another crypto war, with governments around the globe once again trying to undermine privacy. So please join me in welcoming Phil, the godfather of online privacy, as we discuss the battle ahead and what's on the line. So I guess we just start at the beginning, your motivation for creating PGP in the first place, because I feel like it still rings true today.
Well, PGP started out as a human rights project. Back in the 1980s, I was an activist for the nuclear weapons freeze campaign, and there's a lot of overlap between that and human rights groups. And so grassroots activists needed protection from their own governments, not just in the US, but also in many other countries that have, that had autocratic governments. And so PGP was originally intended to protect human rights workers in those kinds of dangerous environments. But governments at that time regarded encryption software as a munition. If you were exporting encryption software, then they regarded that as roughly equivalent to exporting Stinger missiles to Libya. So,
Oh my goodness.
So this led to a 3-year criminal investigation which elevated PGP, pretty good privacy. It elevated it in the public consciousness. The more forbidden it was, the more appealing it was. The government didn't see that one coming. In World War II, governments had a reason to try to prevent other governments around the world from getting their hands on strong encryption. It probably shortened World War II by a couple of years and saved millions of lives. But after World War II ended and decades followed, eventually the internet came into existence, and it was time to treat encryption with a different attitude. The rest of us needed it for e-commerce, for private communications, for online banking, all kinds of things. Now it's everywhere. There's strong encryption all over the place. Every web browser has it. Your mail clients communicate with the mail server through an encrypted tunnel. It's ubiquitous. But now governments are pushing back on it, pushing back on end-to-end encryption. And I am kind of surprised by this because we thought that we'd fought that battle and won.
Yeah, you said in
20
many
years ago.
interviews, like, and now we've won, like, interviews for 20 years ago. We won the crypto wars. We have encryption now. There's no turning back. And then just the government's like, hold my beer. And
Yeah.
just bill after bill trying to ban end-to-end encryption, trying to block private communications. So talk about what's at stake if the government succeeds in once again taking away that ability to have privacy in an online world.
Well, you know, you have to look at the totality of surveillance that we live in. Everything that we do online. You know, we've moved our lives, you know, from the analog world to the digital world. And every little body language and fidgeting in our seats and where we aim our eyeballs is under surveillance. They tap into our optic nerve, metaphorically, by looking at everything that we look at. And some of that is done by private companies. A lot of it is, but governments can ask those private companies for whatever it is that they observed about our behavior. And so every part of our lives is subject to surveillance. And so, you know, governments live in a sort of golden age of surveillance. Everything that we do is surveilled. And so trying to hang on to just a little bit of our privacy by encrypting our email, our text messaging, our phone calls, this is possible, but it's only a few pixels left in this giant display. You know, it's like the governments around the world have this panorama of visibility of observing us, and there's a few dark pixels left that, you know, that are not illuminated, and they're complaining about those dark pixels, you know, because we can make a private phone call or a private email or private text messaging, and they want to have all the pixels fully illuminated so they can see everything that we do. We're trying to hang on for dear life to a little bit of privacy that we have left.
And I mean, communications is that dark pixel the FBI is always talking about. We're going dark. And as you mentioned, we're absolutely not going dark. They're getting everything, but they just don't want us to have that last
would they like to trade the world of surveillance that we live in today for, you know, the world we had 30 years ago?
Right.
I don't think so.
It's crazy. And so that ability to have private communications, really, if you think back before the digital age, we could all have private communications. You just have a conversation with someone outside of earshot of someone, and it's a private conversation. The government wasn't getting access.
Human beings evolved in a world where every conversation was a private conversation. If you wanted others to hear it, you could move closer to someone who could listen, overhear your private conversation. Otherwise, the natural way to talk to another human being is privately, you know. If you just step away from the crowd that you don't want to hear it, you walk over there and talk, the people over here can't hear you speaking. So, you know, I'd like to return to that.
I definitely would as well. And yet the rhetoric that we hear seems to be about how we shouldn't have this ability to have private conversations. Oh, that's going to put children in danger. Oh, that's going to aid drug traffickers. That seems like a very crazy turn of events in my eyes.
Yep.
To relegate private conversations and suddenly normalize pervasive surveillance to a point where we can't even interact with another person without a third party being privy to it.
The way I see that fitting into today's geopolitical context is that we have an ever-growing number of autocrats. There are democracies that are collapsing into autocracies all over the world, everywhere you look. I mean, we live in a time where you know, democracies are in trouble. And it might be a military invasion like Russia attacking Ukraine, or it might be because somebody gets elected in a free and fair election, like in Hungary, for example. Somebody got elected in Hungary, Viktor Orban, and then used his presidential power to seize control of the different parts of the Hungarian society, the courts, academia, the press, you know, the election apparatus, until he became essentially a dictator that cannot lose an election. And you know, it is possible for democracies to fall because of a free and fair election, but then they take control of more parts of society, so that they become permanent autocrats.
Now, back in the day, in the first crypto wars, fighting this battle, it was so important to you. First of all, you talk about missing mortgage payments while you were undergoing all of this. Like, this was an epic fight, but you continued this fight. You went above and beyond. You worked with MIT to get source code out because fundamentally you believed that privacy was a right and it was essential to a free society. So, today I just worry that we don't have a Phil Zimmerman of our era who is going to be willing to go against the most powerful adversary in the world and continue this battle for privacy. I really worry that we may be on a trajectory where we could lose the option of privacy if we don't really stand our ground. Are you worried about that?
Yeah, to push back against autocracies taking over, privacy is one element of that, but there's other things that we have to do also. As a matter of civic hygiene. Some of it we can't solve with technology. Some of it we have to solve in policy space. So we have to try to regulate what happens. Not deploy 1 billion video cameras that have face recognition software behind the cameras. Not creating an environment of surveillance that gives the government omniscience. We've never been in a world where governments have omniscience. And it's not clear that democracy can survive governments having omniscience. So we have to push back against governments having omniscience. It's not just, oh, we need more encryption software. No, encryption is one part of it, but there's a lot more erosion of privacy that goes on because of advances in technology besides things that encryption can solve. There's just pervasive surveillance of all types. And then there's the fusion of all the surveillance data into a comprehensive total information awareness. It's hard to push back in policy space against this because this is sort of a natural evolution of Moore's law. The human population is not doubling every 2 years, but the ability for computers to keep track of us is. We have to push back in policy space. We have to push our governments to not deploy such pervasive surveillance. We have to try to regulate private industry from getting every little aspect of our behavior and putting it in a database and selling it to whichever government asks them for it. Our work is cut out for us. We can't just solve it with encryption software. I did encryption software because that was the low-hanging fruit. I knew how to do that.
Encryption was the easy part, says Phil Zimmerman.
Yeah. We're going to need a lot more than that.
Did you ever watch Batman? There's this great scene in one of the Batmans where he's like, I know how to catch the Joker. We'll tap into everyone's cell phones and we'll use sonar to figure out where he might be just by creating this entire giant mass surveillance network. And then Alfred's like, Batman, do you really think that's a good idea? And then he does it anyway, and he catches the Joker, and then he's like, what, but now I'm going to delete it. But I feel like that's the excuses governments always have. It's like, we'll just use it this one time because it's a very important time. After that, I promise that we definitely
I'll
won't
be
use
dictator
it
for on day one, but not after that.
Yeah, so like how do we survive in a policy world where the government's constantly justifying these tools because, well, we got to catch the Joker this time. It's more important this time. And what we're doing is what you said, we're systematized this apparatus that could be hijacked at any point in the future by any future autocrat and use it against the people.
Well, in every case where we're asked to allow someone to get this kind of power, it's always couched in terms of something that is appealing to the masses. You know, we have to do this to stop pedophiles. We have to do this for national security. We have to do this to achieve this goal that people generally agree with is a good goal. But, you know, once you build a system like that, then, well, now it's an incumbent system, and it's going to keep on being used for all kinds of things. It's irresistible to an autocrat.
Yeah, and when you were fighting the early battles, there was tremendous public support. You did a really great thing. You actually went against the advice of your lawyers, and they were like, oh, don't do press. And then you were like, I'm going to do a ton of press. And you basically created this groundswell movement around privacy as an issue, and it just was brilliant, and eventually the government backed off this case. How do we create that groundswell movement? Because privacy is hard. Convincing people that they should fight for some future scenario, when right now the invasion of privacy in their lives is actually very convenient. That's a very hard sell.
It's, we're getting the boiled frog treatment. It's hard to get people active against the erosion of privacy because, well, it has gradually eroded over the years, and now people think it's normal. How do you get people to push back against what now feels normal?
I don't know. I'm hoping that you have well, Naomi, here's the key, and
Don't
here's
get on
how
Facebook.
To win. Follow these steps. Don't get on Facebook. Yeah, we have shifting baseline syndrome, right? The frog in boiling water syndrome.
Otherwise known as the Overton window.
Exactly. The Overton window has shifted, and now what we consider normal is what we've grown up with. And if you rewind 50 years and you realize how little invasion there was into people's daily lives, the difference is stark. And I'm just wondering if there's an easy way that we can kind of give people that comparison so that they realize how much their lives are interfered with. And maybe that might incite them to push back.
I always try to point to what autocrats can do with surveillance systems. In China, there's 1 billion video cameras in China. I don't know the exact number, but there's facial recognition behind it. There's fusion of different intelligence sources on the Chinese population. And as a result of this, it's nearly impossible for any kind of political opposition to organize in China. And so now this actually you still have a Chinese population that tries to push back. They just can't push back by organizing politically. So what they do instead is they have something called lying down, lying flat, I think it's called in Chinese. And it just means that, well, you can't organize politically against this regime, so let's just become inert and not work, not seek advancement in our career, just subsist on the minimal amount of work that it takes to, get some food and not sleep in the streets. And this affects the Chinese economy. And it's a way for them to sort of passively, aggressively protest because they can't organize politically because there's surveillance everywhere. There's a social scoring system that punishes you if you do something wrong against the government. Well, people aren't doing things against the government. They're just saying, oh, it's sort of a passive protest. We need to have the ability to communicate with each other securely. If a government emerges that is an autocratic government, that we have some way to try to recapture control in the next election cycle, if there is a next election cycle.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I feel like the best thing we can be doing is, one, changing culture, because we need to spread awareness about this. We need to paint a picture, like you just did, of what future possible scenario looks like. And we also need to learn how to use privacy tools now, because there may come a time when it's too late, when these tools are outside of our reach, when pervasive surveillance is so bad, we can't access these tools anymore. We can't download them because all of that's being monitored. So we need to be integrating these into our lives now and teaching other people. And I feel like to create that groundswell movement, it requires people to be really engaged and fired up about this issue so that they go out and they spread the message and fight.
Yeah, already today, it would be harder to do PGP today the way it was in 1991 because today, most of the important apps that we run come from the App Store or the Google Play Store. These are choke points. Mm-hmm. It becomes a single point of failure. If Apple got pressured from the government not to allow some encryption software to be downloaded from their App Store, they could prevent that. There was a case many years ago where there was some piece of software, I don't remember what it was, that Russia objected to. And they asked Apple to remove it from the App Store for Russia, and Apple did. It sort of becomes easy to do when you have a choke point like that.
China does the same thing. The US government does the same thing. I believe recently Australia asked for things to be removed, but it wasn't enough that they just removed things for Australia. They asked them to remove it for everyone in the world. Otherwise, people in Australia might use VPNs and bypass it. We're getting to a system where governments are pressuring companies.
Well, I would hope that, I talked with a member of parliament in Australia some years ago when they were entertaining some piece of legislation, which I think eventually passed, that would limit strong encryption in Australia. And so they were going to try to get Apple to remove strong encryption from their iPhones. But, Apple FaceTime is encrypted end-to-end. And so just imagine the reaction of millions of Australian voters that could no longer buy an iPhone in Australia. I would hope that that would produce some effect on the next election cycle.
So what are your parting words to the audience? This is a crowd who could potentially go out and be activists for this cause. What advice would you give them? What's the next place that they could start?
I don't look at only the privacy aspects of this. Privacy I see as a tool to protect us from autocratic rule. It's a good end in itself, but it also is a way of protecting us from, the bigger problem of government getting too much power over us. And because right now we're seeing autocracies emerge, we should do our best to push back against it. Now, this is an American audience, so, you're going to be mostly focused on the U.S. I lived in Europe for 7.5 years, and a number of European countries are struggling with this. They're under threat from a hot war in Ukraine, but they're under threat from undermining their governments, from Russia helping certain political parties in Europe. So overall, do whatever you can to push back against autocracy spreading around the world. Try to, resist social networks. Try to make sure that we still have access to strong encryption. Push back in policy space to try to prevent that stuff from being shut down. Elect politicians that will encourage real democracies and fight autocracies at home and abroad. And encryption software is part of that, but it's only one part of it. The pushing back against pervasive surveillance of all kinds is important, in policy space especially. I think we already have lots of encryption software, so it's not that we're going to solve it by just writing more encryption software. We have to hang on to the encryption software that we have, but also push back in policy space.
Is there any? All right, we'll go one right there.
You mentioned policy is super important, but you also gave a really good example that because Apple had baked in encryption into their platform, it made it really, really hard for governments to enforce removing strong encryption. Is it really policy, or is it let's get everyone to actually adopt it?
Well, that's a good point. Deployment of strong encryption changes the facts on the ground. And changing the facts on the ground can influence policy. Usually policy lags behind technology. In 1991 with PGP, I was concerned that we were about to see legislation that would outlaw strong encryption. And so I tried to preempt that by deploying PGP first, shoot first, ask questions later, change the facts on the ground, get pervasive deployment of strong encryption before the law can change. And then it becomes more difficult to make the law change to outlaw strong encryption. And by Apple baking that into their operating system, they're using the same tactic that I was using. And that's good. And also, in Silicon Valley, Apple and other tech companies generally have an engineering culture that favors strong encryption, privacy. Some parts of tech companies erode privacy, like Facebook. But Apple had a culture that was so strong in favor of privacy and protecting civil liberties that, you remember some years ago, I think when was it, about 7 years ago?
7, do you know? There
was the confrontation between the FBI and Apple. The FBI wanted Apple to change the iOS operating system to make it so the FBI can break into the secure enclave. Apple has this computing element that has key material inside called the secure enclave. And if you try to open it more than, say, 5 times, then it locks it up completely. And the FBI wanted Apple to change the operating system so it doesn't behave that way. But Apple assumed that if they did that would open the floodgates and all the iPhones in the world would be in jeopardy. And so they fought back and they prevailed in court, and the FBI went elsewhere to solve their problem. But there were engineers at Apple who, if Apple had lost that case, which they didn't, they prevailed. But if they had lost that case, Apple would have been forced to change iOS, and the engineers that would be responsible for making those changes in the software told Apple that they would quit their job instead of doing that. Now, compare that culture to, let's say, Chinese culture. There are tech companies in China that make really great 5G cell towers and related infrastructure equipment. That equipment is under the control of the Chinese government. Huawei was founded by the Chinese military. And so just imagine a Chinese engineer who would tell his manager that if they asked him to, put in back doors for the Chinese government, that he would quit his job. You can imagine that the career of that Chinese engineer would be severely limited after that.
Probably
or
not just
worse,
his career.
or worse.
Other things would be at stake.
Yeah.
For sure.
So Apple's culture is another layer of defense. And so it's good to try to maintain an engineering culture that has a certain amount of libertarian sympathies. Now, I'm not a libertarian, not at all, but there are some aspects of that libertarian philosophy that, there is some overlap between my values and the libertarian, big L libertarian. I'm a little L, I'm a civil libertarian. And apparently there's a lot of those at Apple.
I think that's good parting advice. It's culture and it's tech.
Yeah.
We need to fight those battles. That's all the time we have, but Phil, you are a hero in the space, not just for the tech that you've created, but for the battles that you've fought as well that have protected all of us. So thank you so much for your efforts, and thank you for being here today chatting with us.
All right, my pleasure.